Sifters, Les cribleuses de blé, 1854, Musée des Beaux-Arts de Nantes, exemplifie Gustave Courbet's realist ambition to elevate the lives of ordinary people into the domain of high art. Exhibited at the Salon of 1855 alongside other monumental works, it demonstrates Courbet's persistent refusal to idealize and his commitment to making actuality itself the foundation of modern painting. By portraying the labor of his native Franche-Comté with unsentimental fidelity, he asserted the dignity of a class of citizens hitherto excluded from the grand narratives of academic art. The painting depicts Courbet's sisters, Zoe and Juliette, absorbed in the domestic task of sifting wheat, with a young boy, possibly Désiré Binet, the artist's illegitimate son, standing nearby. The artist deliberately eschews the genteel finery worn by the sisters in The Young Ladies of the Village, 1852, choosing instead to portray them as workers engaged in the physically demanding routine of preparing grain for bread. Zoe, clad in a striking red garment, dominates the composition with her muscular arms and broad shoulders, her vigorous movement charging the scene with palpable energy. Juliette, by contrast, appears exhausted, her posture slackening as though on the verge of sleep, while the stacked sacks of grain looming in the background silently underscore the magnitude of their labor. Courbet introduces a subtle theatricality by turning the principal figure away from the viewer. This compositional device draws us into the rustic chamber, positioning us as silent witnesses to the repetitive yet vital rhythms of domestic work. The sweeping ellipse of Zoe's sifting motion, combined with the fine trail of falling grain, generates a dynamic interplay between physical exertion and material detail, transforming what might appear mundane into a scene of profound visual drama. At the same time, the painting articulates a meditation on gender and social class. By foregrounding the strength and endurance of women's labor, Courbet subverts conventional artistic tropes that prized feminine beauty or passivity. Here, the woman is not an object of charm, but a figure of productivity and resilience, embodying the often overlooked foundation of rural subsistence. The boy and the cat, disengaged from the labor, accentuate this contrast, marking out spheres of exemption and dependence. The reception of the painting underscores its significance. After its exhibition at the 1855 Salon, the Wheat Sifters was presented at the 1861 show of the Society of Friends of Art in Nantes, where it was acquired for 4,000 francs by the Musée des Beaux-Arts. Its acquisition confirmed not only Courbet's growing recognition but also the institutional validation of his radical redefinition of subject matter. Through its earthy realism, compositional vigor, and insistence on the dignity of labor, the Wheat Sifters emerges as both a family portrait and a manifesto of realism, one that insists that truth, however unadorned, has an inherent grandeur worthy of the highest forms of art. Painted in 1855 in Ornans, and now housed in the Musée d'Orsay, the painter's studio, l'atelier du peintre, is Gustave Courbet's most programmatic statement of intent. Executed rapidly and on a large scale, The canvas was conceived as a summer of the artist's aspirations and the social world that shaped them. Courbet famously described it as representing society at its best, its worst, and its average. Rejected by the official jury of the 1855 Exposition Universelle, the painting became the focal point of Courbet's self-organized Pavillon du Réalisme, an act of institutional defiance that prefigured later artist-run exhibitions, notably the Salon des Refusés. The work therefore circulates between private authorship and public manifesto. It is both a studio view and an ideological tableau enacting the artist's program for realism. Formally, the composition is organized into a tripartite field, left, center, right each zone, bearing a distinct thematic charge. Courbet situates himself at the pictorial center, standing before an easel on which he paints the Loue Valley. His back is turned to a nude model whose pose and placement signal the artist's critical relation to academic tradition. The central axis is a site of luminous focus. Light models the body of the painter and the painted landscape, while peripheral groups are differentiated by contrasting handling tighter portrait-like modeling on the right, looser, darker passages on the left. The canvas within a canvas device, the loo on Courbet's easel, asserts both pictorial reflexivity and provincial allegiance. Technically, the painting juxtaposes finished portraiture, many right-hand figures derived from existing likenesses and photographs, with areas left deliberately sketchy, the unfinished works on the rear wall, producing a dialectic of completion and process that underscores the work's metapictorial theme. The painting is dense with emblematic figures and objects. The right group assembles Courbet's intellectual and financial interlocutors, Alfred Bruyas, Champfleury, Charles Baudelaire, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon-Figueres, who embody critical, literary and patronal support. Their presence indexes the social networks that sustain Courbet's practice. The left registers types of contemporary life: working poor, ragpickers, a Jewish merchant, an Irish woman, and a lay figure or cruciform dummy that commentators have read as the death of academic art. Objects clustered at the foot of the portrait hunter, guitar, plumed hat, dagger, buckled shoe, are conventionally read as the residues of romantic costume and affect, signaling the decline of Romanticism. A skull placed atop a copy of the Journal des Débats has been interpreted as a memento mori directed at the Academy and its public discourse. The hunter figure is commonly taken as a satirical allusion to Napoleon III, thereby adding a veiled political polemic. The central child figures, the cat, and the studio's ordinary tools insist upon continuity transmission, apprenticeship, and the quotidian basis of artistic life. The oxymoron in the subtitle, Real Allegory, is the conceptual hinge of the painting. Courbet stages allegory without abandoning empirical specificity. Universals, art, society, death, patronage, are embodied in concrete, recognizable persons and objects. The central thesis is twofold. First, art must be returned to the world it depicts. The Loue Valley on the easel asserts provincial reality as legitimate pictorial subject. Second, art is social praxis. Courbet's studio gathers constituencies, friends, patrons, critics, laborers, so that painting appears as embedded in social relations rather than as an autonomous aesthetic spectacle. The dichotomy Courbet announces those who live on life, friends, workers, admirers, versus those who live on death, exploiters, profiteers, functions as both social critique and programmatic stance. Reading through contemporary political thought, scholars such as Linda Nochlin have suggested affinities with Fourierist notions of communitarian reorganization. The painting's mise en scène gestures toward a reordering of social relations anchored in cooperative production and shared cultural life. Contemporaneously, the painting's reception was polarized. The official jury's refusal and the lukewarm popular response to the Pavillon du Réalisme contrasted with isolated praise from figures like Eugène Delacroix, caricature and ridicule, especially directed at Courbet's apparent self-promotion and at the painting's iconography, attested to its provocation. Subsequent scholarship has reframed the work as foundational for modern artistic self-presentation. It prefigures later modernist discourses on the artist's social role and the studio as a symbolic site. Critical interpretations vary. Some read the canvas principally as autobiographical self-mythologizing. Others emphasize its sociological mapping of mid-century networks of taste, patronage, and radical politics. The painting's use of photographic sources and portrait copies has also attracted methodological attention, registering Courbet's engagement with emergent visual technologies and the modern media ecology. The painter's studio remains a paradigmatic articulation of realism's ambitions. It refuses both the escapism of romantic allegory and the narrow formalism of academic hierarchy, insisting instead that art be accountable to lived conditions and social constituencies. As a work of self-declaration, it establishes Courbet as a figure who imagines the artist not merely as image maker, but as social agent embedded in networks of labor, patronage, critique, and political belief. Its historical significance lies equally in its content and in the performative act of its exhibition, the Pavillon du Réalisme, which inaugurated a model of artist-led presentation that would reverberate through the 19th and 20th centuries. In short, the painting is both manifesto and map, a concentrated condensation of Courbet's aesthetic program and the social world from which that program arose. Painted between approximately 1852 and 1857, Madame Auguste Cuoq belongs to the formative decade of Gustave Courbet's mature realism. These years marked Courbet's decisive challenge to the idealized portraiture that still dominated mid-19th century French art. In contrast to the prevailing academic taste for mythologized femininity, Courbet's approach was grounded in the truthful observation of the physical and psychological reality of his sitters. Exhibited later in his independent show of 1867, a bold move asserting his autonomy from the salon system, this portrait reflects Courbet's growing conviction that the artist must paint the world as it truly appears, unadorned and unidealized. The work portrays Mathilde Desportes, known as Madame Auguste Cuoq, seated against a subdued dark background. The composition is intimate, yet monumental. Courbet's canvas is large in scale, yet the sitter fills the frame with an unembellished, direct presence. The palette muted browns, warm flesh tones, and a subtle play of light creates a quiet intensity that draws the viewer toward the sitter's steady gaze. There are no decorative accessories, no ostentatious jewelry or drapery. Instead, Courbet focuses on the immediacy of form, the physicality of flesh and fabric, and the psychological density that emanates from the woman's expression. Her figure, rendered with Courbet's characteristic dense brushwork, conveys both gravity and sensitivity. While Madame Auguste Cuoq lacks overt symbolic content, it embodies Courbet's moral and aesthetic philosophy, his art of truth. The portrait refuses flattery or sentimentality, offering instead a confrontation with the real. This realism, paradoxically, becomes a kind of psychological revelation. Beneath the surface restraint lies an emotional depth that challenges the conventions of female portraiture in the Second Empire. The sitter's quiet strength and inward gaze may suggest dignity born from self-awareness, an assertion of individuality rather than ornament. In this sense, Courbet transforms a commissioned likeness into a meditation on human presence itself. Courbet's technique here demonstrates his mastery of painterly materiality, the thickly applied pigment, the visible brushstrokes, and the subtle gradations of tone collectively assert the hand of the artist. Unlike the smooth, polished finish of academic portraiture, Courbet's surface feels tactile, almost sculptural, as if modeling the sitter from clay rather than paint. The light falls softly, illuminating her face and the folds of her dress without theatrical contrast, allowing the viewer to sense time's passage and atmosphere. The painting's restrained chromatic range and weighty composition anticipate later developments in modern portraiture, influencing Manet, and through him, much of modern realism. When first seen, the portrait provoked discomfort, even rejection from its immediate audience. Madame Cuoq's husband famously refused it, believing it failed to capture his wife's beauty. This reaction underscores Courbet's challenge to conventional expectations of portraiture. His refusal to idealize was seen as a denial of grace. Yet what once appeared unbeautiful now reveals its modern power, the insistence on authenticity over illusion. The painting's later acquisition by the Havmeyer family and its eventual donation to the Metropolitan Museum of Art testify to its re-evaluation within the canon of 19th century art. Today, Madame Auguste Cuoq stands as a testament to Courbet's enduring defiance of the aesthetic norms of his era. In Madame Auguste Cuoq, Courbet achieved a rare synthesis of monumentality and intimacy. He transformed a private portrait into a profound statement about realism, individuality, and the dignity of the human form. The painting's quiet force lies in its refusal to idealize, its solemn confrontation with reality, and its steadfast devotion to the truth of seeing. Within Courbet's oeuvre, it remains both exceptional and emblematic, a portrait that is, as one critic aptly observed, unusual in scale, intimate in feeling, and revolutionary in its honesty. Painted between late 1856 and early 1857, Les Demoiselles des Bords de la Seine was presented to the Paris Salon Jury and was accepted and exhibited on 15th June 1857, along with 2 portraits and 3 landscapes. Eventually, it was purchased by Courbet's friend and patron Etienne Baudry, 1830-1908, who left it to the artist's daughter Juliette, who in turn bequeathed it to the French state in 1906. Today, it hangs in the Petit Palais, an art museum in the 8th arrondissement of Paris. A smaller sketch of the subject is held in London's National Gallery. Courbet's painterly skill in rendering the fabrics of the young ladies is a salient feature of the canvas. His brushwork employs a subtle range of white tones, conveying the rich texture of the cashmere shawl and the lace-like muslin. The artist also demonstrates his confident handling of decorative patterns in the garments, adding to the impression of a sensuous scene. The composition features 2 reclining working-class girls, apparently enjoying the leisurely calm of a Sunday afternoon beside the river Seine. The figure closest to us, almost seeming to spill out into our plane, is apparently dressed in only her undergarments, as she dozes with a satiated expression of rapture. She wears fine, skin-tight, translucent yellow gloves, heightening the theme of thinly veiled eroticism. Beneath the leaves of the low tree, we can see a moored boat with a hat, suggesting the temporary absence of a male, likely to return at any moment. The other lady is located more in the background and appears distracted as she peers off into the left distance, lost in her thoughts. Perhaps she is thinking of her own love and has yet to have the same satisfaction as her companion. Whether they are innocent city shop girls, enjoying their Sunday afternoon with an unknown male friend, or, as some would argue, they are in fact among the many prostitutes that were known to offer their services to the gentlemen frequenting the Seine, is left to the viewer to decide. The implicit nature of the painting unsurprisingly provoked an outcry at the Salon. Even the use of the word demoiselles in the title was controversial. These 2 females were certainly not dressed as proper young ladies, nor were they acting with decorum. However, Courbet does not wish to censor these women, but is intent on ridiculing the severity of the class system in society. Why shouldn't these working-class women be regarded just as much as valid subjects for serious painting as the bourgeoisie women of society paintings? The reference to sexuality alone would not be an issue for the Salon jury. They were used to it being referenced often in distanced nudes from classical stories, such as the idealized forms of Venus and Diana. Yet, they were entirely uncomfortable with the contemporary presentation of sexuality that verged on the explicit. And of course, there was the hard-hitting message never absent from Courbet's work, confronting the establishment with an unrestrained dose of social truths. For this reason, Les Demoiselles des Bords de la Seine was regarded as far more sexually disturbing than the customary and more revealing nudes that were familiar to the Salon.